For 23 years, the killer's DNA sat in a police database. Perfect match quality, complete genetic profile, ready to identify a murderer. But nobody could find it. Not because the technology wasn't there, not because the sample was degraded. The DNA was invisible because of a single keystroke error made by an evidence technician in 1999. One character, one tiny mistake that kept a killer free while families suffered in limbo. The breakthrough didn't come from new forensic technology or advanced investigative techniques. It came from a detective who noticed something was wrong with a number on a piece of paper. This is how one typo derailed justice for an entire generation. March 15th, 1999. Jennifer Walsh was walking home from her job at a local bookstore in Riverside, California. She never made it. Her body was found 2 days later in Fairmount Park. The attack had been brutal, but for investigators, this case looked solvable from the start. The crime scene yielded everything detectives dream of finding. Clear DNA evidence under Jennifer's fingernails, a partial footprint in the mud near her body, witness descriptions of a suspicious man seen in the area that evening. Detective Maria Santos led the initial investigation. She was methodical, thorough. The evidence was collected properly, documented carefully, and sent to the lab within hours. The DNA results came back clean, a complete male profile that didn't match Jennifer or anyone in her family. This was the killer's genetic fingerprint. Evidence technician David Park logged the sample into the database on April 3, 1999. Case number 990847. Evidence item 15A. Male DNA profile from victim fingernails. But Park was rushing. End of shift. Stack of evidence forms on his desk. When he typed the evidence code into the computer system, he made a simple mistake. Instead of typing 15A for the DNA sample, he typed 15B. In the physical evidence locker, the DNA vial was labeled correctly, 15A. But in the digital database that investigators would search for decades, it was logged as 15B. Item 15B was Jennifer's clothing, not the killer's DNA. The system now showed that evidence item 15B contained both Jennifer's clothing and a male DNA profile. Investigators assumed this was contamination or a processing error. The real DNA evidence, labeled 15A in the system, showed up as clothing only. When detectives ran database searches looking for the killer's DNA profile, the computer couldn't find it. The genetic fingerprint was there, but it was attached to the wrong evidence number. The case started going cold immediately. Detectives followed up on witness descriptions. They investigated Jennifer's ex-boyfriends, co-workers, anyone with a connection to her life. They ran the DNA through CODIS, the national database, multiple times. Nothing. The killer was in the system. His DNA was cataloged and ready to identify him. But the database searches came up empty because the computer was looking for evidence that technically didn't exist. Jennifer's parents, Robert and Linda Walsh, watched the investigation stall. They attended community meetings where police assured them they were doing everything possible. They organized search parties and distributed flyers, hoping someone would remember something new. The wound in Riverside never healed. Jennifer's murder became the case everyone talked about, but nobody could solve. Parents kept their daughters closer. The community changed. Meanwhile, the killer continued his normal life. He might have committed other crimes. He definitely slept peacefully, knowing that the one piece of evidence that could destroy him was sitting invisible in a police database. For 23 years, justice was delayed by a single character error that nobody thought to look for. The years passed. DNA technology advanced. CODIS expanded. Other cold cases from the same era were getting solved. In 2003, a 1997 murder in nearby San Bernardino was cracked when the killer's DNA matched a sample from a burglary arrest. In 2008, genetic genealogy helped solve a 1986 case that had stumped investigators for decades. Jennifer Walsh's case remained frozen. Detective Santos retired in 2004. The case files were transferred to different investigators. Each new detective ran the same searches, got the same empty results, and moved on to cases that seemed more promising. The DNA evidence sat there, waiting. What nobody realized was that the killer might have been arrested for other crimes during those 23 years. His DNA could have been collected and entered into CODIS. If the system had been able to find Jennifer's case evidence, it would have made the match automatically. But the evidence was invisible, tagged with the wrong code, lost in plain sight. In 2015, the Riverside Police Department formed a dedicated cold case unit. Detective Lisa Chen was assigned to review unsolved homicides from the 1990s and early 2000s. Chen was different from the investigators who had worked Jennifer's case before. She didn't just review the digital files. She went back to the original paper evidence logs, the physical documentation that had been filed away and largely forgotten. She pulled Jennifer Walsh's case in January 2022, 23 years after the murder. Chen started by comparing the original handwritten evidence forms with what was entered in the computer database. This wasn't standard procedure. Most detectives trusted that the digital records were accurate, but Chen had worked data entry jobs before becoming a cop. She knew how easy it was to make mistakes when typing information from paper forms into computer systems. She found the discrepancy on page 4 of the evidence log. The handwritten form, filled out at the crime scene, clearly labeled the DNA sample as evidence item 15A. But in the computer database, that same DNA profile was listed under evidence item 15B. Chen stared at the papers for several minutes. She realized what had happened. For over 2 decades, every database search had been looking for the wrong evidence code. The DNA was there, but it was attached to an item number that didn't match what investigators were searching for. She immediately contacted the lab and requested that the DNA sample be reprocessed with the correct evidence code, 15A instead of 15B. The corrected sample was uploaded to CODIS on February 8, 2022. The database hit came back within 6 hours. Marcus Thompson, age 51, living in Moreno Valley, California, just 20 minutes from where Jennifer Walsh was murdered. Thompson had been arrested for domestic violence in 2019. His DNA was collected as part of the booking process and entered into CODIS. If Jennifer's evidence had been coded correctly from the beginning, the system would have flagged the match 3 years earlier. Detective Chen ran Thompson's background. No connection to Jennifer Walsh, no obvious motive, but the DNA match was perfect. 13 genetic markers lined up exactly. The investigation moved quickly. Chen obtained surveillance footage from Thompson's workplace and neighborhood. She tracked his movements, built a timeline, and prepared for the arrest. On March 10, 2022, exactly 23 years and 5 days after Jennifer's murder, Marcus Thompson was arrested at his home. Thompson's reaction was telling. When Chen mentioned Jennifer Walsh's name, he didn't ask who she was or why police were questioning him about her. He went quiet. His hands started shaking. In the interrogation room, Thompson initially denied knowing Jennifer, but when Chen explained about the DNA evidence, his story changed. He claimed it was an accident, said he had been drinking, and approached Jennifer to ask for directions. When she tried to walk away, he grabbed her arm. Things escalated from there, but the forensic evidence told a different story. The DNA under Jennifer's fingernails showed she had fought hard. The attack was prolonged and vicious. This wasn't an accident or a moment of poor judgment. Thompson eventually confessed to the murder. He had been carrying the guilt for 23 years, wondering when police would finally connect him to the crime. He never imagined that a simple typing error had been protecting him all along. The trial began in October 2022. The evidence that had been waiting decades to speak finally had its day in court. Robert and Linda Walsh, now in their 70s, sat in the front row every day. They had waited 23 years to see their daughter's killer face justice. The DNA evidence was overwhelming. Thompson's defense attorney couldn't challenge the science or the chain of custody. The evidence had been properly collected and preserved. It just hadn't been properly catalogued. Thompson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the sentencing, Linda Walsh spoke to reporters. She said she wasn't angry about the clerical error that had delayed justice for so long. She was just grateful that someone finally cared enough to double-check the paperwork. The conviction prompted the Riverside Police Department to audit their entire evidence database. They found 12 other cases with similar data entry errors. 3 of those cases have since been solved. Justice delayed, but not denied. A single keystroke error kept a killer free for 23 years, but one detective's attention to detail finally brought him down. If you're fascinated by cases where persistence and accuracy finally prevailed, make sure to subscribe for more stories where the smallest details made the biggest difference.